Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Emily Sicorsi, and I'm here with Justin.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon to those of you in the Central and Eastern time zones or
So
listening around the
specific.
globe.
You're so specific this morning. I love it. All
Yes.
right. So today we are super excited to have you with us. We hope that we lay out this idea of drift really clearly for you, but we also hope that there's enough room for some of your questions. And if things are not clear, please feel free to use those audio controls, or I'm sorry, those text options on the side. You can either post your questions in questions or in chat on the right-hand side panel for GoToWebinar. And just waiting for a couple more people to filter in, but I think we'll go ahead and get started. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Looks good here.
Cool, good. Alrighty.
Not that I'm the test case, but
Well, you are, because you're the only one that's not muted, so you have to be, my friend. All right, so as we mentioned, we are going to be talking about a phenomena that we call drift. And as this little sketch note would indicate, drift has you sort of wandering aimlessly through the waters of kind of whatever condition you're in. And as I said earlier, if we are moving along, going through this concept and you have questions, feel free to put them in chat or in questions. If something grabs you and you want to send that out to the rest of the world, please feel free to use the hashtag #BrandDrift to share that info. And share also any comments or questions that you have on Twitter. We are at Root and River, and we'd be happy to pick them up and answer them there as well.
and it will be time towards the end for some open Q&A. But feel free to jump in at any time. We may not get your question right then, but we'll capture all of them and make sure that all questions are answered before we depart at our appointed time.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's start with natural forces, which is really where we typically start a lot of what we do. You want to kind of introduce this one for us?
I think that when we think about this idea of drift and that we have to look at the root causes of it, but almost all the causes of drifting, they're really internal, but there's external forces that maybe were triggers or catalysts for drifting away from values and drifting away from innovation, whatever the drift might be. In what we call these, Emily and I call these as natural forces. And there's actually 7 of them that often require deeper examination, and a little side plug that we actually have a workshop that we can bring to your company about these 7 natural forces, and then do a live lab on how to deal with and or harness each of these natural forces. Today, we're going to touch on 3 that we think are the top external influences on drift.
Mm-hmm. So the first one are something that we call the multiple generation gap. So this is the first time currently, over the last few years, that we've had 5 generations that are working together in the workforce, side by side. And so, sorry, slide. There we go. This is a beautiful thing in a lot of ways, and I always like to focus on the positive. This gives us an opportunity to understand one another societally in a really unique way, but it also has some downsides to it, mostly because we all come from these different we all came of age in these different time periods, and there's a lot of cultural differences between a traditionalist, as this infographic positions it, and a millennial, or an individual born after 1997. So, there's a lot of biases that go into each one of these groups, and there's a lot of areas for conflict. And so we have to really reconcile all of this as part of our everyday working environment, and it can create a lot of dysfunction in a workplace, lack of communication, applying all those biases and creating masses of assumptions about one another. Maybe that on the one hand, a traditionalist or a baby boomer doesn't have a handle on tech and wouldn't be able to understand something technical or wouldn't be able to be part of an innovation team. On the other hand, that a millennial is lazy or entitled and doesn't really want to work. And so these bubble up and they create a form of drift, in that if these gaps are not addressed and then they're not really worked through, an action can fester and direction can be lacking, especially with a lack of leadership.
Yeah, and I think that's excellent. And I think what happens when drift occurs is really at the root of this is an identity crisis, because you could organize, for many years, you could organize your brand around kind of two groups. What generation were your employees and what generation were your customers? And so one of the signs of drift as it relates to multi-generation is you're not just trying to attract millennials, you're trying to attract people that have a common thread psychographic profile, what we call opting in. And when you opt in, drift is almost impossible because you're able to organize your brand around a set of values that are appealing to opt-inners, appealing to people that are intellectually and spiritually curious, that they're highly open to new ideas, all these traits. But most organizations don't do that. They think they have to balkanize themselves in order to understand each of the generations, and you really don't. And that's what creates the drift then, is this identity crisis.
Mm-hmm. Another force that's at play here is market saturation, and this crazy snapshot here of New York City and just bombardment of all the senses of different messages. And this is really just a great visual for the bombardment that we receive every day. So every day you're subjected to about 7,000 requests for your action and attention. And those marketers on the other side of those action and attention requests are trying to make them impactful within 3 to 6 seconds. So it is this in-your-face, blunt force trauma, visual hijacking of our world, and it leads to overwhelm, and it leads to a sense of purposelessness. I mean, and anywhere you go, there's just so many options that we kind of drift purposelessly and through all of these options and trying to make a decision, maybe diving into one and trying another. And so the result, again, is that drift, is that bouncing around and going from place to place.
I think what most brands drift from, especially if they have a budget, is they drift from simplicity. Simplicity is really the art of branding. It's being your true self in an authentic, open way to the world. And even in standing in the midst of Times Square, you could do that. A metaphor that came to me as I was thinking about this, about our time on this webinar today, is that a man or a woman standing in the midst of all this noise and holding up a single lit match. And that one piece of natural light and holding it up would eventually draw a crowd. And all it took was this person to light that match. And I think when you return to simplicity, when you turn to simple truths, when you return to simple design, you not only do you stop the drift, but you return to yourself, and that out of that emits authenticity in the world. And it's essentially, as long as you return to yourself again and again as a brand, the drift is almost impossible.
That's true. I also think that when you focus on something so simple, it creates a safe haven for the people around you to experience. You know, I mean, somebody doing that in the middle of Times Square would certainly stand out if they were just lighting a match and lighting a match. But there's some kind of primal simplicity to it that I think engages people, and I think that all of us as consumers, as humans, we are looking for that space in this world where we can focus on something very, very pure, like breath.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, definitely, I think that has power for the individual and also for the people who are experiencing it. And the third natural force that we want to talk about are crumbling institutions. So certainly a lot of crumbling going on in this image. But basically we've seen over the last, gosh, 20 years a real breakdown in a lot of the institutions that we as human culture have placed our trust in, whether that's government, um, religion, banking institutions, the home markets. I mean, take your pick. Our illusion of total safety was crumbled by 9/11, the banking crisis, and even in education, which is a world that is vastly shifted and changing, and in some cases not changing because of drift. And we see this general degradation of the institutions, and so people are really left looking for other options in order to create the structure that we as humans love to have in our most innate tribal sense.
Yeah,
And
and I think within the crumbling of these institutions, is a tremendous opportunity. And this is a broad generalization that's still, I believe, true. Is that our leaders come from what I believe are the four most broken brands of institutional brands. They come from corporations, religion, Republicans, and Democrats. And as a statement of brand and a statement of standing for something, each one of these four areas has crumbled, leading to new kinds of leaders from the startup world, from the academic world, from the nonprofit world. These leaders are emerging from this, and they're building brands that are rich in experience, and they're rich in providing actual value to the world. And I think that we use this abandoned building as a metaphor for the shifting institutions, or the changing institutions or coming institutions. But what a huge opportunity for leaders to emerge. And
absolutely.
I think that's the place to look for it from a branding opportunity.
That's true. That's true. I was definitely going to go there next. I think it's a very hopeful time on the other side of that crumbling. It's a time when new thinking is very much welcomed and sought out in a lot of different ways. And I think leadership is beginning to, very slowly, I think, very, very slowly,
Mm-hmm.
beginning to understand that. Um, but I think, in a way, people could see this as really negative, but in a way, I think it has opened us up for new possibilities. So sometimes you need the dark to see the light, and that's really how I see this one.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you are stuck in an old way of, you're stuck as a part of an institution that is still adhering to the old ways, that's where drift sets in, just to kind of loop it back to that. You will not be able to make progress if you are constantly trying to apply the old methods to a new world. And yeah, a lot of organizations sadly just get stuck there.
Mm-hmm. So now we're going to get into the top 5 symptoms of a branded drift mode, and just would encourage some self-examination on your part. Now, when we say brand, we really mean 3 different kinds of brand. One is your personal brand. Regardless of what your title or role is in life, you are a brand because you emit something into the world that people interact with. The second is your team brand. If you're part of an internal community, like a department or a team, or you're part of an industry, that's a brand unto itself. And the third one, then, it would be the organizational brand. And so when you're examining these symptoms, and there are many more than 5, you can look at them in one of those 3 buckets, and sometimes you can find the same ones in all 3 buckets. So let's go ahead and dig into that.
Absolutely. So the first symptom is audience disengagement. So a lot of people come to us and they are feeling frustrated by the lack of engagement, and particularly with maybe an established brand, maybe a brand that's 30 or 40 years old, and they feel like no one's really listening to maybe what they've tried to do on social media, or maybe their email campaigns, or if they've done that, or maybe they're like, yeah, we get this one a lot, right, Justin? No one comes to our website anyway. And that's a sure sign of audience disengagement. And they are obviously acknowledging that. What they're not acknowledging is that there's really nothing to draw anyone back in, or if the visuals and the whole design took place in the early 2000s, probably it needs an update. And right away, as humans now, we're so conditioned to this bombardment of visual and contextual stimulus that if we do not receive something that is engaging within the first 3 to 7 seconds, as I mentioned earlier, we have opted out of that environment. We have disengaged ourselves. So definitely see this a ton with established brands that have not really kept up their experience with the times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the killer bee here is boredom, but your response to boredom for many brands is to try to be goofy or quirky or cheesy, and all of that comes across as really desperation. The real cure for boredom is to be yourself. Authenticity is never boring. Telling the truth is never boring. The Dollar Shave Club turned an entire industry on its ear by simply telling the truth that a lot of people that use those products knew to be true, but no one was saying it.
And they were interesting, and they had humor, and they were quirky, but it was all genuine.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm, definitely, it's a good example. One other thing I was going to mention about audience disengagement is that a lot of people will recognize it, as I said earlier. They'll be like, yeah, why doesn't anyone respond? But they don't take it one step further of that self-examination. It seems like it's always externally focused instead of internally focused. So we invite you, whenever you're in that space, to, and even we do this with our work, and why did no one respond to this? Okay, we need to look externally, but we also need to look at us. How do we present it? Where did it come out of? Were we rushing to do that? So there's both sides, and I encourage people to look at both sides of that equation.
Yes.
All right, the next one.
So here's a rule. If your brand does enough stupid things, it will turn into a meme. And once you become a meme, that is your brand, because it's not well-crafted BS. It's not some press release. It's not some piece of marketing. It's how the world really feels about you. And there are many, many examples of this, but they all come back basically to a root issue within brands of crappy customer experience. So you all remember the United Airlines fiasco, where the man was drug off the plane, and there were others that happened around that same time with United. And so somebody took this, took and photoshopped an actual image of a piece of United Airlines' marketing and gave her brass knuckles. and that became, that is the brand now. So every time you have a negative customer experience that it reinforces what people already think about you, you're in drift mode. And when that happens, if you're the leader of the organization, you are responsible for that. It's not the flight attendant, it's not the gate agent, it's you as the senior leadership. But there's so little accountability within brands from the leadership about how the brand is perceived. They think they can give it to an ad agency, or this is why the average tenure of a CMO, I think, is 18 months. Because here's a shocking stat: if your brand sucks, a new CMO will probably not help you. And so that's a huge sign of this consistently bad customer experience that shows up through sort of dark humor as a sign that you're in drift mode.
Yeah. And I think for organizations that are in drift mode, now, one of the difficult things about drift mode is that if you're there, it's real hard to recognize you're there. So we're giving you these signs to help you identify that. But I think there's a huge tendency too to say, for leadership to look at something like a meme or a story about crappy customer service and sort of dismiss it. It's like, oh well, that was one bad apple or whatever. But that's just that you really have to stay open and listening to the reports of a customer experience. And granted, it's sort of a fire hose, There's all kinds of ways that people can vent, posting videos, actually reviewing your company, on a review site, whatever it is. There are tons, and so it is hard to monitor, but it's probably one of the most important things that you need to do in order to avoid being in drift mode. You've got to pay attention to the customer experience, and you need to listen to your critics. All right, well, our next sign is a lack of innovation. And it's not just the visual of all these yellow taxis that we're really pointing out here, but this industry, and is unfortunately an industry that has had to really recalibrate and adjust and lost a ton of market share and kind of have become, these might as well be dinosaurs, right, Justin?
Yeah, exactly. Uber and Lyft did not kill the taxi industry. What killed the taxi industry is not listening, lack of innovation. Both traits of drift. Same, you could go down the list from retail establishments going out of business, Airbnb's the largest hospitality company in the world, and they don't own any property. You know all those statistics. So the key point here with lack of innovation is there was plenty of opportunity for someone to do something different. That's what we said, as you mentioned, with the crumbling institutions. Wherever there's chaos, there's an opportunity to do something different. Wherever there's sameness, there's opportunity to be different. What happens is lack of innovation comes from a lack of confidence that the work that you're doing matters, that your brand can actually go do something epic. It's driven by sort of insecurity with a big title. And when insecurity and a big title get together, innovation dies because it doesn't unlock it within the. It doesn't unlock the magic within the walls of an organization to actually go be innovative.
Well, I think it speaks to, an organization's hubris, their ego. It appeals to them. I saw Gary Vee speak, it was about a year ago, and he talked about how he had a lot of relatives that were working in the taxi industry, I believe, is in on the West Coast, and he saw what was happening with Uber and Lyft, and called and talked to his uncle and said, hey, you gotta be aware of this. You gotta change. This is coming. And no, it won't hit us. It's not, there's all these regulations, yada yada. And unfortunately, people's livelihoods were destroyed because of this idea that they wouldn't have to change, that somehow these trends and technology would pass them by. People would not seek a different way, or the market itself would not correct something like the disgustingness of riding in a cab, or the uncertainty of knowing whether or not you're going to have a ride to get somewhere, and standing on the side of the road with your hand out, that the market wouldn't correct those things. And there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of hubris involved in adopting that idea that you don't need to change. All right. Oh, this makes me so sad. I hate this picture. But Justin tells me he researched it, and nobody was.
Nobody died. No lives were lost in the shooting of this photo. But a lot of stupidness is captured here.
A lot of waste. Yeah.
Right. And here's the thing. If marketing is not a lifeboat, it's also not a way to fix a sinking ship. It's neither of those things. Marketing is an amplifier of the truth, ultimately. So when a brand is in drift mode, and you can tell because they keep using marketing to try to fix the drift. And we love branding, and I don't know if we love marketing, but we understand its role. But it doesn't fix these things. The only cure for drift is leadership, active, awake leadership,
yes.
Accountability, things like that. So if you examine your brand or examine a brand in trouble, they get new logos, new slogans, new ad campaign. Look at Burger King. Mm-hmm. Burger King has tried 50 different kinds of ad campaigns. None of them have worked because the problem isn't marketing. The problem is lack of innovation, lack of differentiation, lack of customer engagement. I mean, you're going down the line of all the symptoms of drift. You can see it in Burger King.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think they actually, the cruise line industry tried a campaign that was like, we're listening to you. Yes. I mean, it was actually a very good campaign from just an objective standpoint, because that's what they should have been doing, but it's too late. And I think one of the big things that they're missing too is just, millennials and younger people don't want to travel that way as much as maybe some older generations prefer that. So it sort of bleeds over into innovation, and these are all sort of things that influence one another. So they could be concentric circles if we were going to diagram them out.
Right, exactly.
When you think that marketing can fix whatever's going on, you probably have a lack of innovation, and you probably are trying to not look at the crappy customer experience or the audience disengagement you're also experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that good enough is a strategy, this one super gets to me, bothers me so much because it's so pervasive in organizations. Like, this whole attitude of, well, no, we'll never be as great as this innovator in our industry. We'll never be as beautiful as this other competitor who has beautiful branding and a beautiful brand experience. But what we're doing is good enough, right? I mean, I've heard this so many times, it just makes me crazy. What we're doing is okay, it's good enough, and that's just who we are. We just need to accept it. A lot of resignation and acceptance in a negative way going on there.
Exactly. And a very quick walk down branding history lane. This is an AMC pacer. In the mid '60s, AMC's board hired George Romney, Mitt Romney's dad, and he took over the company and turned it around, and they started producing a whole series of cars that were in high demand, and they were known for being unique and different. George Romney had a falling out with the board. They brought in another insider, a good enough person, and in order to compete with Japanese cars, which were cheaper, much higher quality, better fuel efficiency, especially in the midst of the oil crisis in the '70s, and this is what they came up with. And then they give it to the marketing people and tell them they need to market this, and marketing can't make a poop sandwich into a BLT. And what starts it is good enough. And this, as you said, Em, is this idea that if we're going to be slightly better, maybe that'll be enough to get a little bit of market share, and we'll just use just enough marketing to try to get people to buy something that they don't need, and then if they buy it, they'll be disappointed in. So that's drift, like real life historical drift right there in this ugly little car, which ironically, I don't know if you know this, is a huge collector's item now because they were such poor quality that they fell apart within years. There's not that many of them.
That's funny. Everything comes around.
That's
now,
exactly.
I feel like good enough is a gateway to so many other crappy things inside of a brand. Like if you think of good enough as a doorway, on the other side of good enough is, lack of innovation, poor engagement inside of your organization. I mean, it's just such a low bar to set. It's really, really sad. All right, so we wanted to kind of dive into some conversations that make drift worse. So we wanted to get really specific because drift is happening all the time, every day, inside of many workplaces, inside of many organizations. And the evidence of this are the way that we talk to each other, the way that we interact. And so what we wanted to arm you with today were these little tidbits that you may hear, and suddenly it might spark something to say, oh, maybe we're in drift. Have we really looked at this? So that's what we're going to kind of dive into next.
Mm-hmm. So where this comes from is I do a lot of speaking. Emily and I do a lot of speaking. And when we talk about millennials, inevitably some crusty old guy comes up to us and says, millennials don't want to work. And so for a few years, as I just sort of nodded and never said anything, and then finally one day, and we use this answer pretty much every time now, is you're right, millennials don't want to work. They don't want to work for you. Because the mythology that they don't want to work is because they're not going to do it the way that you did it. They're not going to do it within your command and control, wear your khaki pants and show up at 8:30 and take, that type of stuff. It's not going to happen. And the reality is, let's put it this way. If this is something that goes on inside the walls of a company, if this is what they say, that this conversation is making drift worse. because it's moving away from the truth. And the truth is that millennials are very hard workers when they understand the why, the strategy, and they understand how they fit in to an overall something that's got meaning and depth to it. Without that, they don't, and they'll just, if they're talented, they'll move on, and if they're not talented, they'll stay, and that's even a more expensive problem.
Absolutely. I would always hear the phrase, "Oh, millennials are so entitled," and I would say, maybe that's true. They've certainly grown up with a lot, but I see them as being very empowered. That's the balance to it. They feel like the world is their oyster, and they do not have to tolerate a crappy job that sucks their soul. They won't do it because they have been taught to be very aware of their own emotions and their own feelings, and to go out and seek what makes them happy. And guess who taught them that? Their parents, which is probably the person that we're having a conversation with.
That's right, yeah.
Or their grandparents. So it's just funny how once these things come to bear, we sort of go, what? How did this happen? It happened because of you, because we all did this together. We're all connected. So I think when you harness that empowerment, and when the millennials, younger workers, they feel aligned to the mission and the purpose, and that's clearly articulated and believed by everybody at the leadership level, they will work incredibly hard beyond the 8 to 5 khaki wearing idea. Sitting on our couch at 10 o'clock at night in their pajamas is a working idea, which is another problem, but
yeah,
that's a different webinar. Here's the next one. What if we don't change at all and something magical just happens? Wouldn't that be nice? The point here is...
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. No,
the point here is that everybody wants change, right? But nobody wants to change. And so if you are having conversations about problems and issues that require change, but nobody is actually talking about how they can change themselves, this is drift. You're there. You've arrived.
Right. Yep. And there's a side piece to this, and we've actually seen this, that we can't change our brand because we've already invested in our old brand so much, and that's usually around we had someone say they couldn't do this because they already had a bunch of letterhead they just had printed, and so fine, people are going to do what they're going to do, but that you would sacrifice this opportunity to be different in the world for the sake of a pile of letterhead is a bad leadership decision.
And or the future of your company.
The future of your company, right, exactly. And there is this common phrase in business coaching or business consulting that hope is a 4-letter word. It is the highest kind of profanity in branding, hope is, in the sense that you keep doing what you've been doing, and as this cartoon says, something magical, it just happens out of the blue. You get acquired, or you hit on the right ad campaign to get enough people to buy your stuff. That doesn't happen anymore. Brands appear and disappear with regularity, and if you want magic, it's going to happen in an entirely different way.
Oh, this is a fun one too. Well, sacred cow here for us. What if we offend our core customers? We hear this phrase a lot. Well, let's not try that. We might offend someone, or we might alienate this group. Now, you never want to be tone deaf to your audience to balance out, the customer experience. But it's never a good reason. I mean, basically, the core of this sentence is fear, and fear is never really a good reason to try something new. If it's thoughtful, it's considered, and your core, you may have a misunderstanding about your core customers, about how they think and how they feel, and that mythology is keeping you in drift mode, keeping you from innovating, keeping you from talking to your customers. It's a lot of fear and a lot of sacred cows that this statement is reflecting the protection of.
Yep. I don't have anything to add to that. That was fantastic.
Wow. That's a first, right, buddy?
It's not a first. It was the first time on this webinar, yes.
Oh, on this webinar. Okay. So, who are we?
Anybody guess what this is? You can put it in the chat box if you can guess as we explain this idea of an identity crisis, what business this was. And I got a funny, quick story about this once we figure out who it is. And so the idea behind this, somebody got it right. Yeah, it says Blockbuster, and that is true. This is a Blockbuster. What?
Blockbuster Video.
Yeah, Blockbuster Video after the fire sale. The reason we use this is this example, and you could use BlackBerry and Pan Am and AOL and a bunch of other brands that have done this, but Blockbuster did it with such public display. If you look in Google Images for closed Blockbusters, you see thousands of pictures that people took of Blockbuster closing because it seemed like that would never happen up into the early 90s, or mid 90s, early 2000s. There is one Blockbuster left. It's in Alaska. It's a franchise, and they tweeted out the other day, please stop tweeting us pictures of what Blockbuster buildings have been turned into. We can't handle all the traffic. So, but the key here is an identity crisis. And Blockbuster thought they were in the the VCR video market. They didn't realize that they were in the entertainment market, and the entertainment tastes always shift. Or if they did realize it, they were like, we're going to ride this out, and we're going to get our golden parachutes, and all of these franchisees and all of the employees are going to suffer because no one ever actually answered the "who are we" question. And if I was to pick one of these conversations that does the most damage, it's this one. This idea that people are unwilling to answer the question and unwilling to do that inner work. That's why we say the cure for drift is to go inward, not outward. And by going inward, you return to your roots, to your values, and to your beliefs, and it fundamentally changes how you see yourself in the world as a brand, as opposed to the perpetual chase of selling this, selling the same thing over and over again, and eventually the market shifts and you didn't prepare for it, or worse than that, you didn't see it coming, or worse than that, you knew it was coming, you didn't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm. I think when you don't ask this question of who you are, then you're reliant upon, the trend of the moment. You're reliant upon dealing with serving a certain segment. You're basically putting, goggles on yourself to only look at, what's right in front of you. And it's incredibly hazardous. I mean, if you're building a business like that and you're employing people, dangerous. Mm-hmm. We have to ask ourselves the hard questions and face up to them in whatever aspect of our lives or our business. We have to. Otherwise, we will not be living fully in reality. So, not that this is an easy question, but, life ain't easy, so.
Well, that's true.
So this one, you may recognize the cast of Mad Men, and while it certainly would be fun for them to build an ad campaign for Root and River, the idea that we can get some bids from some ad agencies connects to that idea of the sunken cruise ship, that marketing can fix it, right? So this is the phrase I would hear. Oh, well, let's get an agency to do this. Let's not do that inner work of understanding who we are, and instead let's hire somebody to put on, lipstick on all these pigs around here. If you keep hearing this from leadership, that we need a bigger, we need to hire a better agency, we need to find the most popular agency in town and let's get them, that's trouble. Mm-hmm. Trouble's afoot.
Exactly. So where this comes from, I think, and this definitely, you've been on both sides of marketing, on the client side and on the service provider side, as have I. And what I've noticed is a disturbing thing about this, like, let's get some bids from some ad agencies, is it's about this idea that it's sort of like the cartoon about magic, like some sort of mythical hero is going to appear with this elixir and it's going to solve all your problems, and it's called advertising.
Yeah.
And it doesn't anymore. Now, here's the thing. It used to.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the Marlboro Man, or look at all the basic, look at how advertising was used to sell stuff that killed people. But it doesn't work that way anymore. We're not saying you shouldn't advertise. What we're saying is that when you get into that mode of let's go get a bid from an agency to figure out who we are and how to fix all of our crappy problems, you've already surrendered to the fact that you think you don't have any control over this, and you do. That's why as you lead, how you lead becomes your brand, and they are forever and ever and ever joined together, branding and leadership.
You have the most control over it.
Right. Of anything, any other part of your business, that's for sure.
Right.
I mean, maybe operations and branding. Those are the two things you have a lot of control over if you have some awareness.
I wrote the social post the other day that you are not going to understand everything about your business. You're not even going to understand everything about a success or a failure. And there's so many things in business as business owners, entrepreneurs, that you will not get. But you can get who you are as a brand and why you exist in the world. And you can own it, and you can be the beacon of that belief system to the rest of your organization. It's such a huge opportunity for leaders. Okay. I'm going to climb down from my soapbox now, and we're going to move on. So what to do about drift? What shall we do here? Let's get busy with this stuff. Number one, be specific.
Yes. Vagaries, generalities, cliches kill credibility.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to, and especially this is for those of you that are responsible for marketing within an organization, you know that the brand's in drift. Or I would say if you're in HR too. The two people that know the brand's in drift are typically people in marketing and people in HR.
Yes.
And if you know this, you can't come to the executive team or the owner with some sort of generality about, like, it just feels like we need to do something different. I think we've gotten a little stale. You have to say, no, our logo sucks. Let's do something about it. Or we get zero traffic to our crappy website. We must do something about it. In that specificity is leadership, is clarity, is something they can go, yeah, okay, I can do that. Let's go work on this. And that's how we got one of our clients that's a credit union, is that the marketing person knew they needed to do a rebrand, and she was very specific about what she wanted from the leadership team, and they said, sure, go look for that, and they found us. And it was in that specificity that she was able to lead in a moment where she wanted to stop the drift and go do something different.
And if that is you, if you are that voice saying, this sucks, part of being specific is thinking to what you want to do, how you would change it. And please feel empowered to suggest something. It will start the conversation. It will show that you are serious about it. It will show that you've given it thought. Come with a plan. Doesn't matter if they take your plan, really. What matters is that you are saying, this is a problem, and here's how I would propose to solve it. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Next one. Take action where you can.
So this is born of a story where this young lady, teenage lady girl, approached the Dalai Lama and asked and said, I want to change the world. How do I do that? And he said, have you cleaned your room? And she said, no. And he said, go clean your room and then see if you still want to change the world. And so this huge pile of dishes is an action that you can take. What was the funny thing? What did you say to it when we were working on the webinar, Em? It's like, yeah, I did this 4 times yesterday.
Yeah, this was like my whole day Sunday. Every time I turned around, there was a new pile of dishes in my sink.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But what that does.
Focus.
What?
It's actually good for the soul. It focuses you on a specific task with a beginning, middle, and end.
Exactly. And branding can be so, and marketing can be so esoteric. It feels like it takes forever to get results sometimes. But there's always something to do, because real branding is more like a garden. It's not like fresh cut flowers that you have to replace all the time. It's more like growing a garden of flowers. And if you have a garden, there's always something to do. There's always a little bit of pruning, a little bit of digging around the roots, a little bit of fertilizer, a little bit of bug protection. And in those daily doings, you begin to push back against drift. You begin to push back from apathy. You begin to push back from disengagement, because you're doing what you can do. You're cleaning your room, metaphorically, in the face of a bunch of people saying they want to change and saying they want to do something, nobody actually doing anything.
Yeah, I mean, to loop it back to the first one, if they say, well, no, we're not going to do that, there's probably still something within your purview that you can change. So, okay, so the organization as a whole is not going to work on the crappy art logo, our crappy logo. Well, I'm going to work on the content on the blog and make it so much better so that people actually do come at least just to see that. Or I'm going to make the visuals that we use on our blog a lot better, and here's how we're going to do it. There's always something that you can do. And also connected to that is speaking truth. This image scares me a little bit because people are getting burned at the stake for doing that. It's not very motivational, but anyway, I would say even if people have said no, if you continue to speak truth. If they ask, well, why aren't people coming to the homepage? Why aren't they converting on these forums? Well, because our logo sucks and the messaging is from 15 years ago. But did you see the blog that I've been working on? Because that's gone up.
That sounds like a real story, Em.
It does, doesn't it? How funny.
Yes. Yes. And this is the temptation under. I mean, this is from the Inquisition. This is a wood carving, painted wood carving from the Inquisition. Is in the midst of chaos, the biggest threat are the truth tellers. And drift is chaos. It's just silent, deadly chaos. It's not like, holy crap, our share price has dropped and all of our customers hate us. It's a state of sort of sustainable apathy. That is the worst kind of chaos because if everyone's afraid to say something. And so if it's you can just begin to speak truth, especially about cultural stuff. Everybody, they do an engagement survey, everybody sits around rubbing their chins and wondering if they should do Taco Tuesdays so they're loved again. And you can go, no, the reason that they're not engaged is because we don't treat them with respect. We don't listen, we don't, et cetera, whatever the truth is. When you do that, you're able to sort of stop that drift in its tracks and begin to push back against it, because it kind of goes to the next slide. Because when you start to speak truth, you can do something there's this term I picked up a couple years ago called conversation jujitsu. And jujitsu is using your opponent's aggression against them.
Yes.
And one of the best things...
Reversing the polarity.
Exactly. And rather than go around trying to convince everyone that you're right, which is a technique I've tried for years, is focus more on finding an influencer, of someone on the board, someone that's a senior executive, and nurture a relationship with him or her, and then flip them and say, listen, I know you see what I see. I need your help. Because if we don't do this, we're jeopardizing the future of the company. It takes courage, conviction, clarity. It takes these things in order to do this. But once you flip that influencer, you buy all of their political capital in your effort to change your organization.
Well said. And that kind of goes right along with this. If you flip enough influencers, and if you are able to, by speaking truth, by offering alternative realities, if you're able to attract people to this movement that you're sparking, and then you've got a couple influencers, you can really impact change. You can really begin to move the people, which is always the first step of change.
And you think about what Eleanor Roosevelt did. She used her. She was an influencer. She was some situations were brought to her attention, primarily related to institutional racism, child labor laws, the treatment of women, a series of things. And she then began to use her role as First Lady and really co-president in many ways with FDR to affect that change.
And so you may not be Eleanor Roosevelt, but you may know Eleanor Roosevelt, and if you bring something to their attention, you get this ally that's a tremendous force for you. Back to the credit union, the person that our main contact there, the head of marketing, flipped was the heir apparent to the CEO in waiting. And once she was on board, all the other leadership team then flipped to this idea that, hey, we need to do a rebrand. And so you may not be able to, in your career, spend 30 years becoming the Eleanor Roosevelt of your industry, but I guarantee you, you already know these Eleanor Roosevelts within your industry, within your organization.
Yes. All right. So that brings us to open discussion. And anything else you wanted to add, Justin, before we take questions?
No, I don't think so.
Cool. Well, one question, just to kind of, and feel free to go ahead and post your questions in the question tab, and we'll be looking for them there. Or if you had something you wanted to ask, and it's easier to put it in the chat tab, go ahead and do that. But one question that I think would be worth discussing is maybe a brand that has recovered from drift, that has found their way back out of it. What do you think?
Well, I think that one of my favorites is Harley. Harley Davidson had lost its way. There was this joke about Harley Davidson. The reason they had so much chrome is so you could find the pieces along the freeway. And why do you need a pickup when you have a Harley Davidson? Because you need something to haul it when it breaks down. I mean, there's all these jokes. Again, back to these before there were memes, there were jokes about brands that spread around. But they brought in new leadership, and that new leadership returned the organization to its roots. And one of the senior leaders, I believe was the CMO, said, "We forgot that we don't sell motorcycles. What we sell is the ability for a middle-aged man to drive through a small town and scare women and children." And he said that jokingly, but there's some truth to that, what the Harley brand stands for. And one of the reasons I love this example is they worked on everything. They didn't change the logo. They used the Harley logo, kind of like Old Spice has done. They didn't change the Old Spice logo.
That's my example. Hey.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm sorry. I'll stop talking about that one then.
I was going to say. The other one that definitely is a fun one and really unexpected is Old Spice, because they were pretty much, as a brand, just completely irrelevant. I personally just thought of it as something my grandfather kept in his cabinet. And then they went through a full kind of reinvention where they got a huge sense of humor about themselves. And then they shared that in a way that was just so well done. And I don't know the internal story, and I'm sure there is one. There had to be new leadership for that to occur. But I just love the daringness and the humor and the way now that we go to Target and my husband goes right for the Old Spice stuff, and their products smell the best, and they really just, from soup to nuts, redone the whole customer experience and the entire brand, and they're doing well again. So it's cool.
What's interesting about that, and it's so funny, our synchronicity here, Em, that you used them as an example, and we didn't say which examples we were going to use. They hired a brand manager about 10 years ago, which would have been an early millennial. She was in her late 20s, and she got enough political capital to say, we're going to go do something radically different with the brand, and we're not going to, because where it was going is they were going to take it off the market and reintroduce it as a new thing that with a new name and a new logo. And she said no. She spoke truth. And they went back, and you told the rest of the story. But it all started with one young leader going, no, we're not going to do that.
Absolutely, that's awesome. I just knew it intuitively. Had to be a woman. Had to be a woman that manufactured that awesomeness.
You should be in branding.
I know. I'm a little bit of a knack, huh?
Another question we get is, how do you find the people to be willing to be in a movement? How do you find them?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it definitely begins with speaking truth. When you are speaking truth, you have to, and I know it's scary, right? There's a little bit of fear that's bubbling up for you, but you've also got to get outside of that and get aware of the way that people are reacting to you. And the people who ask questions, the people who maybe their eyes light up and they lean in a little bit, those are the ones that you want to keep your eyes out for. And, you know, I would just say, we're not trying to be manipulative here, but build a relationship with those people. Find out what part of your beliefs, this truth that you're speaking, what appeals to them. You know, maybe they took this job because they really want to do something radically different, but they happen to be an introvert. So they need they need a partner with somebody who's perhaps a little bit more extroverted about that. Or maybe they're more of a junior member, but they're going to be a very loyal ally for you. So you've got to step outside of yourself and start paying attention when you're speaking truth to how that is accepted, or the reaction that you get.
Yeah, that's excellent. Mine would be this. Find the people in your organization or community or industry that are working on themselves. Because people that work on themselves understand performance, they understand discipline, they understand commitment, they understand an investment of time and energy and resources. And if they're working on themselves, they're going to have a much greater awareness of the world around them. And so it's the one that's always maybe got a self-help book he or she is reading, or they make sure that they go to the gym every day, or they do volunteer work. Whatever that may be, that's an activity of self-care, those are the people that are very, very likely to be your allies, because they feel a disconnect, they feel the drift, and they've already dealt with drift in their own lives through discipline, and so therefore they're likely to help you deal with drift at an organizational level.
Yeah. Well, that really brings us to the top of the hour, so I don't see any other questions.
Doesn't look like it.
No, but we are so grateful that you all joined us today, and please feel free to visit RootandRiver.com. There you can subscribe to our newsletter and read our blog posts. It tend to be pithy at times. We invite you to follow us on social media and reach out to us individually. As Justin mentioned earlier, we do offer workshops on drift and on a variety of other things, which you can find at our workshops tab on our website. And yeah, and if you or your organization, or you know an organization that seems to be in drift but aware of it, wants to get out, we always appreciate a referral. And everything that we do always begins with a conversation. So that's our little pitch.
Yep, and thank you guys. Thank you all for those listening live, and then those listening to this later.
We will send out the recording by tomorrow morning. We'll get that recording out to you.
Absolutely, and it'll be posted to our YouTube channel a little later for if you want to go share it with the world, which we would appreciate.
Yes.
All right, that was fun, Em. Thank you for once again for these. I wish we could do this every day, because it's so fun and energetic.
I feel the same way.
Alas, we have clients to take care of, and families and all the other stuff.
Darn work. All right, thanks everyone. Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.